She was born in Windsor Castle, surrounded by the gilded silence of tradition, a princess, not just by title but by blood, intertwined with nearly every major royal house in Europe. Her name was Alice, her birthright. Royal. Her life ahead, anything but predictable. Alice of Battenberg came into the world on February 25, 1885. Her mother, Princess Victoria of Hesse, and by Rhine, was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Her father, Prince Louis of Battenberg, was a high-ranking naval officer of German descent. From the beginning, her world was a tightrope stretched across empires. British, German, Russian, Greek her roots ran deep into each. Yet, in that grand web of royal alliances, Alice was different. She was deaf. Diagnosed in childhood, her hearing loss was profound but never allowed to define her. Her mother, determined that her daughter not be left behind, taught her to speak and lip. Alice mastered multiple languages through observation, reading lips in English, German, French, and later, Greek. But in the royal courts of Europe, difference was dangerous. To be deaf was to be doubted. And so, from a young age, Alice learned to mask her struggle with poise and grace. A silent strength grew within her. She grew up between palaces Windsor, Darmstadt, Malta, charming all who met her. Handsome, intelligent, and deeply spiritual, Alice had a serene dignity. But beneath the elegant surface lay a vulnerability the world was not yet ready to understand. Her family life was loving but burdened by the looming clouds of political tension. Europe, though glittering with royalty, was beginning to tremble beneath the weight of change. Empires were growing restless, and Alice stood at the very center of it all. Her relatives included Queen Victoria, the German Kaiser Wilhelm II, and soon enough, through marriage, the Greek royal family. In many ways, she was born into an illusion of stability. But the world she entered was already cracking beneath its own grandeur. By the time she turned 16, she had fallen in love. His name was Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, tall, dashing, with the eyes of a soldier and the charm of a cavalier. He was the fourth son of King George I of Greece. And Alice, ever dutiful, ever romantic, embraced the idea of becoming a Greek princess. Their wedding in 1903 was one of imperial splendor. European royalty gathered in full pageantry, the last great coming together of crowned heads before the world unraveled. Guests included the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, King Edward VII, and Wilhelm II of Germany. They danced, they toasted, they celebrated. No one imagined that within a decade, many of them would be at war. Some executed, some exiled, some murdered. But for Alice and Andrew, the story was only just beginning. As the newlywed couple settled into Greek royal life, Alice embraced her role with sincerity. She learned Greek, wore the national dress, and walked among the people with kindness. She had children, 5 in total, 4 daughters, Margarita, Theodora, Cecily, and Sophie. And in 1921, a son, the boy who would one day walk beside Queen Elizabeth II, Prince Philip. But behind the royal curtains, tragedy loomed. The Greek monarchy was unstable, often exiled, often restored. Wars erupted across the Balkans. The family was forced to flee more than once. In 1922, Prince Andrew was arrested and nearly executed during a political coup. Alice, carrying her infant son in one arm and leading her daughters with the other, escaped aboard a British warship. She was a princess, yes, but also a refugee. Her life had become a paradox. Born among queens, raised in palaces, yet forever running from war, instability, and politics. After the chaos of exile and escape from Greece, Princess Alice and her family found temporary refuge in Paris. But peace would not follow them. The roaring 1920s that danced through Europe's capitals did not reach Alice's soul. Instead, A silence grew deeper within her, one that no palace, no title, no wealth could drown. She was no longer just a princess. She was a woman shaken to the core. Her husband, Prince Andrew, drifted further into distance both emotionally and physically. He gambled. He wandered. He disappeared into his own grief. And Alice turned inward. Her body remained in exile, but her spirit began its search for meaning. She fell into long periods of reflection, prayer, and silence. She fasted. She spoke of divine visions. She believed she was receiving messages from Christ. Her family, especially her mother, Princess Victoria, grew concerned. It was a time when royalty hid anything that might suggest weakness, especially mental illness. But Alice's behavior grew impossible to ignore. In 1930, without her consent, her family had her committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland. Her daughters were left confused. Her young son Philip was sent to live with relatives in Britain, without explanation, without goodbye. Doctors diagnosed her with paranoid schizophrenia, though to this day, historians debate the accuracy of that label. She was subjected to crude, invasive treatments. Sigmund Freud himself was consulted. He theorized that her delusions were rooted in sexual frustration, and recommended x-raying her ovaries to induce early menopause, a barbaric act by today's standards. She was isolated from the world, forbidden to see her children. For 2 years, she was kept apart from everything and everyone she loved. And yet, even in this darkness, Alice found light. She rejected the diagnosis. She claimed her spiritual experiences were not madness, but revelation. Over time, her mental clarity returned, but her heart had changed. Something inside her had deepened, softened. She left the sanatorium, not as a broken woman, but as a woman transformed. No longer defined by court life, by royal expectation, or even by motherhood. Alice became devoted to a new cause: faith. She studied Orthodox Christianity more seriously than ever before, not as a royal tradition, but as a personal calling. She walked among the poor. She listened to the cries of the sick. She felt, at last, that she had found a purpose greater than herself. Meanwhile, her son Philip, now a boy of 10, was shuffled between royal households in Britain. He lived with Mountbattens, with the King of Greece, with schoolmasters in Scotland. He wrote letters to his mother. She answered when she could. But the connection remained fragile, severed by both time and trauma. By the late 1930s, Alice re-emerged in Greece, not as a princess of the court, but as a woman on a mission. She began to wear gray habits, simple clothes, a veil. She worked with the poor, the sick, and the hungry, often without recognition. The Athens society that once gossiped about her now regarded her with quiet respect. Then the world cracked open again. In 1939, war returned to Europe. Hitler marched. Cities burned. Millions fled. And Alice stayed. By 1941, the world had shattered again. The Nazis had invaded Greece. The swastika flew over the Acropolis. German soldiers marched through the cradle of Western civilization, while starvation spread like a second army. Over 300,000 Greeks would die during the occupation, many in silence, many in shadow. Princess Alice stayed. She could have fled. She had every reason to leave: a royal passport, British connections, safety waiting across the sea. But she chose the opposite. She remained in Athens, cloaked not in silk or gold, but in a grey nun's habit. She had founded a Greek Orthodox nursing order, the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary, and devoted herself to charity, to serving others, to being unseen. She lived in a modest apartment, just steps from danger, in a country ruled by cruelty. Her 4 daughters had all married into German aristocracy, some with worrying ties to the Nazi regime. Her son, Prince Philip, was serving in the British Royal Navy, fighting the very Axis forces occupying the land she called home. But Alice did not flinch. Her allegiance was to God and to the people in front of her, not kings, not ideology. Humanity. In 1943, that conviction was tested. The Nazis began rounding up Jewish families in Athens for deportation. Most would be sent to Auschwitz. Few would return. One family, the Cohens, had nowhere left to run. They were well known, well respected, but their name had become a sentence. Alice opened her door. She hid Rachel Cohen and her 2 children in her home, just steps from Nazi headquarters. Their father, Hymaki Cohen, had once helped King George I of Greece. Now, his family's life rested in the hands of a deaf, aging princess who walked with a cane and spoke of angels. German officers came to question her. They asked about her visitors, about her loyalties. She stood straight and stared past them. "I'm deaf," she said. "I can't hear your questions." They left her alone. It was a lie. She had learned to read lips years ago. But in that moment, her deafness became her armor. Her silence became her resistance. She was now a warrior of compassion. Throughout the occupation, she gave away what she had: blankets, food, medicine, prayers. She arranged funerals for strangers. She walked the streets without fear. When bombs fell, she stayed. When soldiers knocked, she waited. She did not cry out. She did not run. She endured. By 1944, the war began to turn. The Nazis withdrew from Athens. The swastika was torn down from the Parthenon. The Cohens walked free, and Alice, once again, disappeared from view. No awards, no speeches, no parades. She never spoke publicly of what she had done. It was only decades later, long after her death, that Yad Vashem, the World Holocaust Remembrance Center, in Israel, recognized her as one of the righteous among the nations. One of the few royals, and the only member of the British royal family, to ever receive that honor. She didn't ask for it. She never would have. To her, it was not heroism. It was simply right. By the 1950s, Europe had rebuilt itself from the ashes of war. Thrones had been shattered, borders redrawn, and the world that once defined Alice of Battenberg had vanished. She had lost so much: her country, her home, her friends, her status. Her husband, Prince Andrew, had died in exile in 1944, alone in Monte Carlo. Her daughters, spread across Europe, were living quiet, aristocratic lives. Her beloved Greece was no longer hers. But one part of her heart remained alive: her son. Prince Philip, the boy she had once carried on to a British warship as they fled Greece, was now a man, a naval officer, a husband. In 1947, he had married Princess Elizabeth, heir to the British throne, and in 1952, she became queen. Alice, now in her 60s, stood outside it all, watching from afar as her son became consort to one of the most powerful monarchs in modern history. She sent letters. Sometimes she visited. But her life remained simple, devoted to faith, to service, to solitude. She returned to Greece after the war and continued her work with the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary. She opened a home for orphans and the elderly. Her days were filled with prayer, not politics. She smoked cigarettes, carried her rosary, and walked among the poor like one of them. She refused to use her royal title. She answered only to Sister Alice. But the Greece she returned to was restless again. By the 1960s, political instability threatened everything. The country teetered toward dictatorship. Alice was aging, her health declining, and so, in 1967, her son brought her home, this time to Buckingham Palace. She arrived not as a queen dowager or titled noblewoman, but as an elderly nun with worn shoes, no money, and a suitcase full of religious texts. She moved into a modest room on the upper floors of the palace, far from the golden halls and staterooms. There she lived quietly, while the royal family moved around her in ceremony and spotlight. Palace staff were puzzled by her. She would sit in the drawing rooms, chain-smoking and telling stories about Greek mythology. She spoke openly about her faith and her visions. She had no interest in fashion or status. She was unfiltered, honest, occasionally eccentric. But behind the veil and the cigarette smoke was a woman of enormous wisdom and pain. Her relationship with Prince Philip had never been easy. Years of separation, silence, and war had strained their bond. But in those final years, mother and son found their way back to one another. In private moments, he sat with her. They spoke of the past, of exile, of survival, of God. She never demanded his time. She didn't need grandeur. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that he had survived, that he had found his place, that the little boy she once saved from a collapsing monarchy had become part of a new kind of royalty, one grounded not just in bloodlines, but in duty. On December 5, 1969, Princess Alice of Battenberg passed away in her sleep at Buckingham Palace. She was 84 years old. Her will was simple: no jewels, no palaces. She requested to be buried in Jerusalem, on the Mount of Olives, near her aunt Grand Duchess Elizabeth of Russia the Royal, who had devoted her life to God and been murdered in the Russian Revolution. In 1988, her remains were finally transferred to Jerusalem, fulfilling her wish. Today, she lies in a crypt overlooking the ancient city, honored not for her crown, but for her compassion. Princess Alice was never a queen. She never ruled a country. But in a century of collapsing empires and unimaginable cruelty, she stood as a rare symbol of integrity, faith, and courage. She was never meant to be famous. Born into privilege, connected by blood to almost every royal house in Europe, Alice of Battenberg could have lived a life of ceremony and distance. She could have disappeared into the footnotes of history, remembered only for her lineage, granddaughter of Queen Victoria, great-granddaughter of Tsar Nicholas I, wife of a Greek prince, and parent of a man who would walk beside a British queen. But that was not the path she chose. Instead, she forged a quiet rebellion, a life of contradiction, deaf yet perceptive, blue-blooded yet barefoot among beggars. She walked through palaces and poverty, through exile and war, untouched by vanity. Her story, unlike those of her royal contemporaries, unfolded not on a throne, but in the margins where hunger, illness, and loss dwell. And yet, it was in those very margins that she became extraordinary. In the aftermath of the Holocaust, her name remained unknown to the world. She never boasted of sheltering the Cohen family. She never stood before a crowd to explain why she had risked everything to protect strangers. She never wanted applause. But the truth has a way of rising. In 1993, over 2 decades after her death, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Center in Israel, recognized her as righteous among the nations, an honor given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during World War II. Her children, her grandchildren, even members of the press were taken aback. The quiet woman in the nun's habit, who smoked by the palace window and spoke softly of prayer, had defied the Nazis under their noses. Her grave now lies in the Church of Mary Magdalene on the Mount of Olives, beside the woman she admired most, her great-aunt Elizabeth, a Russian Grand Duchess turned Orthodox martyr. The irony is not lost. Born in Windsor Castle, Alice chose to rest in a land torn by centuries of division, surrounded by olive trees, stone, and prayer. And yet, her name is rarely spoken aloud. In documentaries, she is often overshadowed. In dramas, she's a fleeting figure appearing briefly in The Crown, portrayed with dignity but limited screen time. To some, she is just a line in a royal family tree. To others, an oddity, a royal nun, a mystic, a woman plagued by visions and silence. But to those who truly see her, historians, survivors, seekers, Alice represents something rare. She was a vessel of endurance, a soul carved by suffering, but never hardened, a seeker who lost everything and still gave more. She did not need a crown to be noble. Her authority came from compassion, her strength from belief. In her final years, she wrote simply, "I am at last convinced that the purpose of life is not to be comfortable, but to serve." That sentence, buried in her correspondence, says more about her than any coat of arms ever could. Today, as empires fade into textbooks and royal houses modernize or dissolve, the quiet integrity of Alice of Battenberg feels timeless. In a century of noise, she listened. In an era of destruction, she preserved life. In a world obsessed with status, she shed hers. She reminds us that greatness doesn't always roar, it often whispers. And that some of history's strongest figures are not those with armies, but those with unshakable grace.